Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's having a wonderful day. It's a beautiful day here. So today I'm going to talk about specifically is we don't have to change our thoughts, we have to change our state. And what I mean by that. And so a lot of people ask me about negative thoughts, and they have this negative self-belief and all these different things. And so the easiest way to come out of this is by changing our state. Because when we're in a negative state, we have negative thoughts. But if we have a positive state, we'll have positive thoughts. You've probably noticed that if you're in a good mood, the thoughts are usually reflected by that good mood, with good thoughts on how you think about yourself, how you think about everything in general, how you think about specifically things are going to look in the future, basically just overall. And so specifically, our reality is a reflection of our thoughts. And so if we have bad thoughts, ultimately, if we continue with those thoughts and believe in them, it's ultimately going to show up in our reality. And so the key with that is we don't have to go in and change every single thought. And so the thing that's most easiest to do is change your state. And so there's nothing in this world that we have to struggle to overcome or achieve in this life. Something I found to be true. Because if I'm struggling to overcome or achieve something in this life or specific problem, it means there's a better move. And so it's like the game of chess. And so there's one move that you could make on the chessboard that would make the game easier for you. And so that explicitly applies to this game of life. Is if we're trying and we're struggling to overcome or achieve something, there's a move that we could take that would make it all easier. Because a lot of people, just say and simply boil it down to, just think better. It's a thing in difference to kind of select which thoughts that we're diving into, which is a totally different topic, which is a good one, because whatever we feed and whatever we water grows, just like this grass or these trees. If we water it, whether it's by rain or whatever, some form of energy, then it's going to grow. And so that's the thing with negative thoughts, is there's that aspect too. If they do enter our head, we don't feed them energy. But then there's the other aspect, which I was talking about before, which is changing our state. And so we change our state through breathwork and meditation. And so you probably noticed this after you've exercised or after you've meditated or if you've done breathwork before, how good you feel. Not all breathwork sessions, depending on the type of session, you'll feel good afterwards. Because a lot of different types of breathworks, you'll tap into these, traumatic experiences, negative emotions in order to release them. And so that starts the process of you connecting with those emotions to feel them. And so then you'll start to feel negative afterwards. But anyway, I digress. Is the thing that we have to do is change our state. And so when is the best time to change our state? In the morning. Because when we wake up, we're in a theta wave state. And so from age 0 to 7, we were in a theta wave state, which we're basically absorbing all the information around us. It's a state akin to hypnosis. And so when we're in that state, we can easily wire in a new state. And so that's the perfect time to do meditation, exercise, breath work, or whatever you may be doing that you're using to change your state. And that is key. The key is the timing. And so you can also do it at night before bed, because we'll also be in a theta wave state, akin to hypnosis. It's like when you're dozing off right before bed. It's that type of feeling. And so that's the feeling that we're trying to capture when we go deeply into our meditation and breath work. And so when we get to that space, we'll start to realize everything starts to flow easier. Everything, no longer bothers us the same way that it usually does. It's because we're not identified with the mind and we're just kind of flowing with the experience. Because when we're tapped in truly to ourselves, all those beliefs and labels that we've casted upon ourselves to form our identity, we're not really bogged down by those anymore. And so when we get to a space through the breath work, and the thing I found most to be changing of state is exercising and breath work, those two things. And so breath work can be done anywhere, so can exercising, but it's kind of limited on what you're trying to achieve. But the best way to do it is through the breathing, because when you're exercising, you're breathing. And so it's that breathing that brings us into that space that allows us to change our state. And so that's the key of all this, is when we change our breathing, we change our state, because our patterns of breathing are literally reflections of how we're feeling in the current moment. And so if you've noticed, sometimes if you're angry or sad or crying, you'll have this kind of discoherent, unregulated pattern of breathing. It's not uniform. And so our breathing reflects our mental state, our emotional state. And so if one controls the other, that means that we can use the breath to control the emotions. So if we're in that state of sadness and we're like hyperventilating or breathing through our mouth or breathing irregularly, we can tune into our breath, change our breath, start breathing more uniformly in a regular form of pattern, and that will change our state. And so if you ever notice that you're in a state where you're in a state of negativity, everything's just going wrong, and you just have a bad outlook on everything around you and the future, this is where you can tap into breathing. And so, especially when you're just starting out on this journey, it's super important to be super dedicated and consistent with the breathing when you're first starting off. Because after a while, you can start to go in and start to flow, and the practice doesn't have to be so rigid, because you start to realize when you drift off from your center. And so the more that you realize you start to drift off to your center, you can tap into the breath. And so a basic breath that I like to do, everybody probably knows this in the community by now, is inhaling 5 seconds and exhaling 8 seconds. That's a really good breath to tune in. And you can also check out the Find Love Within guided breath work, because this will kind of guide you in to change your state. Because there's a lot of different states. There's state of love, state of peace, state of bliss, state of anxiety, state of depression, state of ADHD. All those are states of consciousness. And so we can learn to change our states. And so later on, I'm going to release a Find the Bliss Within guided meditation, breathwork variation. And this is really going to elevate your state. And so when we get into the state of bliss, everything starts to flow towards us. All barriers break away, because we're no longer binded by our negative state, because we're always attracting, whether it's good or bad. And so the magnitude to what we attract, whether it's good or bad, is dependent on our state. And so like I said on this in another video, is if we're in a negative mood, we'll start to attract negative things. You know, I like to use the example of specifically, if you start the day and something goes wrong at the first part of the day, it usually starts to gain momentum, that negative state, you know. Say you're waiting for a taxi and the taxi's late and then you're late to work or whatever. The day kind of starts off on a bad note and that negative state builds up momentum, and then you notice other things start to go wrong as well. And so that's a key example of that. Is negative state attracts negative things, positive state attracts positive things. And so the key is to wire in a higher state of consciousness, and so that we're not bogged down by all these external events happening, all these things that don't supposedly go our way. Because if something that we perceive as negative that have happened to us, or some event didn't go our way, is because we're searching too much externally for that validation, for that love, for that sensation, for that hit of some sort of validation, a hit of dopamine or whatever you want to call it. And so we can find all those things that we're looking for within. And so that's the essence of what I teach, is we can feel all those emotions, the state of bliss, love, peace, all those things, so we don't need anything. And so essentially, change your state, our thoughts will change. And so it's kind of hard when you're in a state of peace or bliss to have bad thoughts, if you're truly in that state. And so then the next level deeper is starting to look, once you're in those states that are elevated, what are the things that bring you out of those states? And so those things become our teachers. And those things will teach us what our beliefs are that we're holding about the specific situation that's causing us to feel these negative emotions. Because whenever we take a piece of information and we channel it through our belief, and if it's a negative belief, we'll feel negative emotions. And so it's a belief inherently not to us. And so when we do that, we feel those sorts of bad emotions, and that will easily change our state. And so it's key to look for those things, to identify them and become conscious of them. Because when we do, then we can overcome them. And then it makes it easier, so then we won't no longer suffer from those things when they occur externally anymore. So essentially that's the video today, is we change our state, not our thoughts. When we change our state, our thoughts will change. And so it's not a forcing of just think better. So something to remember, and start meditating every single morning if you haven't already. If you're just starting, meditate at least 3 to 5 minutes a day. 3 to 5 minutes a day if you're just starting out. And that's super key, just to starting, being able to tune in and tap out of your mind. All right, peace and love, everyone.